Welcome to week 4, where we are going to continue our discussion about water cycling in the atmosphere. And specifically, we're going to be talking about when that water in the atmosphere condenses and forms things like fog and clouds and precipitation. So in video 1, we're going to get into fog and dew and frost. And then in video 2, we'll talk a little bit about atmospheric stability and how that relates to cloud formation, and then we'll get into what clouds are and how clouds form, and then we'll discuss the different types of clouds, and then we'll get into precipitation. So, dew. Dew is water that condenses out of the atmosphere. So basically you have that water condensing as tiny little water droplets on the Earth's surface. So things like grass, twigs, leaves, your car. It forms on calm, clear nights. So when you have these objects, things like your car, plants, grass, that are cooler than the surrounding air. So the Earth's surface cools much quicker, so that surface is now cooler than the air. So because it's cooler than the air that comes in contact with that cold surface starts to cool as well as the conduction of the heat transfers, and then we end up with that air reaching its dew point, and then we have the water vapor condensing on the surface. So that's dew. Frost is basically the same idea, frozen dew. So it's the same exact process. You have surface, and the temperature difference is much greater, so you have temperatures below freezing, and that water vapor skips from the liquid form straight to goes from vapor, skips liquid, and goes straight to the solid form to deposit as frost. And you can see little needles that have developed here on this tree over time. So it's going straight out of the air and then crystallizing to form these needles. Fog, pretty similar idea. So this is a cloud basically resting at or near the ground, so coming in contact with the land surface. Forms when you have the air cooled or starts to cool to a point where it's below its dew point. And what happens, so for example here we've got some air rolling in off of the ocean, coming in contact with a cooler ground, so we can have evaporation and mixing, water vapor adding to the air through evaporation, and then you have that mixing of the damp air and dry air. So there's a few different types of fog. Form in slightly different ways. So Vection Fog. This is when we have damp air moving in off of maybe the ocean, for example. So you have wind bringing damp air over cold surfaces, so the land would be the cold surface in this case, and then that air that has that damp air that has rolled in over that cold coastline cools to its dew point. And then radiation or ground fog. This occurs when you have some damp air at the surface that is overlapped by dry air. And as the surface of the Earth is cooling through radiant cooling, we end up producing this cloud at the Earth's surface here. So you have clear nights, layer of damp air near the surface, the ground, and that is below this dry air above, and then you have this rapid cooling at the surface, and then you have that damp air reaching its dew point to produce that fog. We could also have upslope fogs. This is when you have damp air that's slowly rising along maybe a mountain front and cooling to its dew point. And this is common along mountainsides, so you probably see this along Mount Hood oftentimes. Here's an example of that, and then here's at Whiteface Mountain in New York. We are in the fog in this photograph here. We also have evaporation fog. This is common when you have the mixing of two unsaturated masses of air. So your breath on a cold day, you have damp air from your lungs, meets the cold air outside, mixes together, becomes saturated, and then you have that fog forming. You can also find this in areas like Yellowstone along warm hydrothermal vents like this. Cold air moves over the warm water, evaporation increases the water vapor in the air, and then you have dew point being reached, and you end up with that fog created. So that is how fog, dew, and frost form. We'll come back and talk about atmospheric stability in video 2.